2021-2022.
Questions on the aforementioned bills be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honorable members in blue.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Questions that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day sitting.
So, papers.
Honorable member Fraser, Central.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Public Finance Management Order 2022, the Securities Christopher Calendar Exemption Order 2022, Securities Yuli Juarez Exemption Order 2022.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 8, sir. In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the Debt Conversion Counter Guarantee Bill 2022.
Honorable member Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to lead this debate this afternoon, a very important one, because much has been said, sir, recently with respect to the amount of debt that Barbados has accumulated, and some citizens certainly have raised some legitimate concerns with respect to how the debt will be addressed. And I'll take this afternoon just a few minutes just to address substantively, I believe, sir, the connection clearly between the development of a country and the nature in which that development is financed, and also try to ensure, sir, that persons appreciate that given the very strong public policy that successive governments of Barbados have undertaken, that the ability for us to be able to not just finance, but to deliver, sir, on our social compact that we would have taken, I think, over the course of time, responsible decisions to be able to improve the lives, sir, of all Barbadians. The bill before the Chamber this afternoon, sir, is really to authorize the government of Barbados, as it says at the objects and regions, to enter into a counter guarantee agreement with anybody in respect of debt to be issued by the government of Barbados, the proceeds of which will be used for debt conversion transactions for the purpose of supporting environmental, economic, or social development in Barbados and for related matters. You will recall, sir, that we passed in January of 2019 the Public Finance Management Act, sir, and within the context of that bill, sir, we emphasized to the country that how we respond to environmental needs, sir, would be critical. And therefore, we started to lay the platform, sir, with respect to signaling to the country that Barbados is a small island developing state in wanting to respond to all the vagaries of climate and the challenges that climate certainly presents, that we needed to be in a position, sir, to make sure that we can maintain the normal development trajectory whilst responding, sir, to building mitigation in response to the climate crisis. But it is important, sir, that the public, in my view, sir, appreciates that the Barbados of today, sir, compared to Barbados of 1966, that we have built, sir, upon very strong social policies, a development trajectory, sir, that needed to be financed. And much of the debt that Barbados has today, there's a direct correlation, sir, between the stock of debt and what we have been able to build out, sir, by way of a various range of either infrastructure, but programs, sir, to be able to respond very critically to the needs of Barbadians. And to be quite honest, sir, building a country, building a society requires resources. And just like any household, sir, any parent today wants the best for their family, but you may not always have, sir, available to you all of the necessary cash resources that would allow you to be able to do all that you want for your family. And if you appreciate, sir, that in building a country, that you have to, at some point, ensure that you're able to not just satisfy the needs of persons, but have the capacity and the ability, sir, that over the long term, that you can repay that debt. Now, sir, if you look at Barbados today, we have well over 60 primary schools, sir. And the truth is, sir, if you think about how that has, and certainly that has reduced, as you know, given a lot of amalgamation have taken place. But the reality is, sir, is that you could not possibly build 63 or 64 primary schools, sir, all at the same time. Similarly, sir, we have 22 secondary schools. We have a range of polyclinics. We have a range of post offices, sir, outpatient clinics across the country, sir. Fire stations, sir, across the country. Police stations across the country. So if you think about just the infrastructural development that we've had to build out, sir, to provide the services that the public certainly expects, then certainly you could not possibly have all of the resources available to you in 1966 when we became independent, sir, to do all of that all at once. By no means, sir, we've had to build out the various infrastructure in the country, whether that is through the road network, sir, certainly with respect to the gas infrastructure and the like, with respect to state-owned enterprises, sir, we've had to make those critical investments by accessing debt such that we're able to continue the development trajectory of the country. And therefore, it has been and will continue to be a critical discussion that the country must monitor very carefully, because it is critically important that the people recognize that in taking on debt, that there's actually something that you can see, that is tangible, you can touch and feel it almost, sir. To be mindful that when we go to work every day and we whether as employees or self-employed people, as business owners, sir, that the framework within which we are working is to ensure that we have the capacity, sir, to be able to repay that debt over time. So whether it is your individual circumstances, your business circumstance, or the country, you must be in a position, sir, to be able to repay that debt. And successive governments, sir, with the exception of the last one, have done a reasonable job, sir, of showing to the average person that Barbados continues to develop, not just because of the taking on of debt specifically, but we've been able to build capacity within the context of the economy where there has been some significant expansion of the private sector to be able to help carry the load, sir, if you like, with respect to the ability of government and the country to be able to repay its debt. This bill this afternoon is before the chamber, sir, because as we have done, sir, over the last 4 years, we've always sought ways to be as innovative as possible to be able to help us to get through this particular period of time. And it is not to be misunderstood in any way, sir, that when we took office 4 years ago, the economy was very bad. A lot of the social services, sir, were in dire straits. And we had to make critical decisions at that time, sir, to be able to respond to that. Whilst trying to remedy, sir, a lot of the unpaid bills and those things that were left behind in order to be able to get the country to start to feel proud again about being a Barbadian, sir. And so whether it is the trucks that we acquired, sir, with respect to the Sanitation Service Authority, whether it is the electric buses that we bought, sir, with respect to the Transport Board, whether it is the work that we did, sir, to stop and address the free flowing of sewage on the South Coast, sir. We had to use resources, sir, that were not available to the last government, meaning debt, sir, in order to respond to those very specific interventions, in order to bring about, sir, not just relief to Barbadians, but a sense of pride. Because ultimately, sir, you don't want that you are building up debt, but your infrastructure is crumbling such that it creates almost like a barrier, sir, with respect to your capacity to be able to repay that debt. Because had it been left unattended, as the last government certainly was hell-bent on doing, Barbados' ability, sir, and its economy to be able to function would have been called into question, and therefore the debt levels at that time was already unsustainable. It would have been pretty much very challenging to be able to respond had we not addressed, sir, those critical fundamental issues in relation to those public services. But it is important, though, sir, that the public appreciates that your ability as a government or your ability as a household or a business, sir, to operate, you always need, sir, a little space to be able to do what you have to do. And the extent to which you're embarking on whether it's capital works, infrastructure, sir, in the country, and certainly we had a very robust discussion last week with respect to the response that we are making in respect to the Scotland District area, the largest said investment in that area in the country. It is important that the public recognizes that we are doing those types of interventions, and any government, sir, has to engage in those types of interventions to ensure that the country as a whole, sir, the country as a whole can function and therefore does not hinder our ability to service our debt. Now, sir, some debt is expensive, some debt is concessional, some debt is market rate, and to the extent, sir, that your credit quality, whether as a country, whether as a business, whether as an individual, sir, it is important that we recognize that our ability to maintain confidence, that the ability to finance, sir, our way through any specific period, and I can say it, as I said in a previous debate, sir, since we took office in May of 2018, sir, whilst the initial period was particularly challenging when we announced that we were restructuring the debt, and there was, as you would expect, sir, a level of uncertainty with respect to the outcome of that, and that is not unreasonable, sir. The last 6 to 9 months, sir, because of the combination of external factors, or I should say the last year, because we are approaching just a year, sir, with respect to the impact of Hurricane Elsa. In the last 12 months, the financing of government's program in terms of how we've had to respond to COVID, to Hurricane Elsa, as well as a range of other issues, sir. The last 12 months, certainly from the Ministry of Finance perspective, has been the most challenging in terms of actually financing government's program. And I say that because, sir, we had built up, when we entered the program, sir, in 2018, you may recall, sir, we spoke to the public about being able to build buffers to be able to help absorb shocks. And yes, sir, that meant that as we continue the reforms, certainly in the context of the IMF, sir, you will recall that after every review, we will get just approximately $46 million, sir, as part of their disbursement. That acted, sir, as a catalyst with respect to other multilateral institutions assisting government's program by way of policy-based loans to help finance government's operations, sir. And therefore, sir, we have built up a reasonable level of debt prior to COVID-19, specifically, sir, to help finance in the short term how we would operate. Now, sir, COVID hit, the economy, sir, took a significant beating, as particularly within the context of the tourism and the related areas. And you would recall us saying in this place, sir, on more than one occasion, that initial impact, sir, saw approximately $2 billion in economic activity, sir, real economic activity, which means jobs, sir, it means profits, it means income, sir. $2 billion loss, approximately, sir, in 2020. And because of that $2 billion loss of economic activity, sir, it meant that our GDP, if one was looking at your income with respect to that specific year, losing, sir, approximately almost 15% of your income in the way that one will look at these things in a very short space of time, sir, is particularly significant. But that $2 billion, sir, translated into about $600 million loss in revenue, sir. But you would recall that we had to respond because as people were out of work, sir, as hotels were uncertain about how they would function, sir, we had to make decisions with respect to how we are going to keep this country called Barbados, sir, afloat, head above water, as the Prime Minister likes to say, so that we can get through the pandemic. And so, sir, what we did then is that we took some very early decisions, because it's important that people appreciate, sir, that if we did not do what we had to do, sir, in 2018, when COVID hit, we would not have been able to access those resources that I'm talking about now, sir, to be able to help Barbados get through. So when the demands on the NIS, sir, because as you would appreciate, sir, with such a significant increase in unemployment, sir, coupled with the fact that with the increase in unemployment, it means that contributions, sir, decrease going into the unemployment fund. So you got a sudden increase, sir, with respect to the demands on the fund, less contributions coming in, sir, the ability for the fund to be able to give those persons their unemployment benefits, sir, they were compromised. So the government, sir, had to release monies in effect, sir, to the NIS to be able to help to do that. Similarly, sir, we took a decision that in order for the country, sir, to be able to get out of this, it means that at some point, once growth resumes, that you must have viable businesses to be able to do so. Now, sir, a lot has been said about tourism and all kinds of things, but I think Barbadians now have an acute understanding, sir, as to the importance of tourism to the lives of all of us. And tourism isn't a function of tourists coming from where they come from, sir, and lying on the beach. There's a range of activities, sir, that are involved that I think Barbadians have a better appreciation today than they didn't have perhaps prior to the pandemic. But we took decisions, sir, that given the significant impact that tourism had or came under because of COVID-19, we needed to ensure that those businesses, sir, did not go insolvent or bankrupt. And therefore, we put together a program, sir, because we had resources available at the time, sir, the same resources that we got with respect to being able to pass those reviews and to be able to help finance that initial program. We immediately put those resources of being available to cover those two very big things, whilst at the same time, sir, introducing, I should say, we increased you recall, sir, we increased the welfare grants by 40%. And we also introduced, sir, the Adopt a Family program using some of those resources that we had, because we were able to access some cheap debt, for lack of a better term, sir, that we had built up some buffers to be able to respond, sir. And without that capacity, because that did not exist, sir, I being quite straight, sir, that did not exist when we took office, sir, on May 25th of 2018. And this is not to in any way, sir, allow Barbadians to think that our discussions in this place, sir, are partisan, but I want Barbadians to appreciate that our capacity, sir, to withstand the COVID shock did not exist in 2018. And therefore, any discussion around debt, sir, must be put in the right perspective, because without our capacity, sir, to access those resources, I swear, sir, that our ability to get through the last 2 years would have been completely impossible. Because as you recall, sir, the state of the country in 2018 versus the state of the country in March of 2020, sir, was really chalk and cheese. And in 2020, sir, there was a certain buoyancy, if you like, that people were starting to see come back. And one of the critical things that the government has continued to focus on is what would be those things, sir, that will help drive growth, which effectively, sir, for the most part, once your growth rates, generally speaking, sir, are greater than the interest costs, for the most part, then you do not worry, sir, with respect to your ability to finance the debt, because so long as there is growth in the economy and you're continuing to be able, and of course, and you're spending wisely, because you got spending money on something wise in the first place in order to assure that even if there's growth and the growth rates are higher than the cost or the nominal cost of your debt, that one is usually very confident, sir, in your ability to repay. I know that the country's completely lost confidence in the last administration to do so, and rightfully so, sir, because they were completely inept with respect to those matters. But we simply, sir, did not have any capacity to withstand the COVID shock in 2018. And therefore, as we come here today, sir, to give the public information, and as we continue to publish, sir, in the fiscal framework and the mid-year review, as we have done over the course of the last 3 years, sir, I hope that Barbadians will get a better understanding that what this government has been able to do to protect the lives of ordinary citizens in this country, that we would not, sir, have been able to do it were we not in a position, sir, to be able to access debt at concessional rates within the last 2 years for sure. But that was, I was going to say pivotal, sir. It was, but it was, what allowed us to do that was the reform, sir, in the first 18 to 19 months of this administration. Now, sir, much has been said in the public about how much money we've borrowed from the IMF. And you would recall, sir, that when we negotiated with the fund, initially, sir, the amount of monies that we negotiated under the program, sir, was 220% of quota, which for the most part, sir, was probably about 400 at the time, about 450 million Barbados dollars, approximately. But we started with that, sir, because we understood that we were able to use that as a catalyst for other multilaterals to help come to the aid of Barbados, allow us to restructure our debt, respond to those social pressures that the country certainly was experiencing at the time, and use those resources, sir, to enhance the lives of ordinary Barbadians. So Barbadians have seen not just roads repaired, but we've responded to issues in the housing estate, sir. We've responded to a wide range of things that required cash. cash that the previous government, sir, did not have because their ability to finance their way through was seen and experienced, sir, by downgrade after downgrade, which meant that the cost of borrowing, sir, just to deliver basic things were increasing rapidly. And therefore, our approach, sir, has been and continues to be that we want to focus on not just the debt, but our ability, sir, to grow our way out of this thing. I'll come back now very quickly, sir, to that of the IMF. So when COVID hit, sir, and we saw the shock, nobody thought that airplanes, sir, in our lifetime will stop traveling globally from on a commercial perspective. Nobody saw that. And I don't think there's anybody that with any credibility would say that they knew that this thing was going to happen. We understood the shock, sir, and immediately, sir, because we were already in the fund program, the International Monetary Fund increased the allocation to Barbados, as they did certainly with other countries globally, because it was important, sir, in April, May, June, July, August, and September of 2020, sir, when even though we did not have a high number of cases of COVID in Barbados at the time, the world, as you know it, sir, was pretty much shut down. No planes were coming to Barbados, but we still had, sir, services to provide to the public. We still, sir, had public servants to pay. We still had income tax returns to pay, sir, VAT refunds to pay, all kinds of things, sir, we still had to provide as a government whilst facing an economy, sir, whilst faced with an economy that was basically shut down. And we took our own public health measures and implemented those, sir, to the benefit of Barbadians. You would recall, sir, that in late February, early March, late February, sir, we started the reconstruction with respect to Harrison Point, sir. Our ability to do that, sir, was because we had access to those resources to do that. And I reiterate, sir, those resources were not available to Barbados in 2018. And the ability, sir, to finance, meaning, sir, to make cash available above that which you are collecting on a daily basis. So I want you to imagine, sir, that during that period, we were collecting $50 million less when the month comes, sir. And, sir, I can tell you that it ain't easy to because you're in a program, sir, you set where you're going, and then all of a sudden, sir, out of the blue, everything just come to a halt. But we did not give up, sir, because we knew that our underlying reforms, sir, had Barbados on the right path. And as we just exited, sir, the fund program, whilst, yes, there are a lot of people, sir, today who, regrettably, sir, have had the most horrible 2 years with respect to their financial situation because of COVID. Nothing that this government has done, sir, but because of COVID alone. Even though persons have had that real experience, sir, I believe that ordinary Barbadians recognize that the government's response to the pandemic in total and how we were able, sir, to provide within the context of our ability to respond at the time, sir, that we give consideration to the various stakeholders, sir, but we took decisions, sir, that we believe and felt in our hearts that these decisions were in the best interest of Barbados, given the uncertainty that existed at the time. And so, yes, that increased access to IMF resources, sir, it wasn't just that there were increasing resources, sir. We had to maintain what we were doing in the context of the provision of public services. Because I know, sir, the instinct, and I don't want to remind the public, sir, that you would recall that the last government did not experience COVID, they didn't experience any of the issues that we have felt, that we have been faced with in the last 4 years. But they had already started, sir, to embark on some very serious injustices, in my view, sir, with respect to their policy positions, with respect to education, a range of issues, sir, that confronted this country. So, as I see it, sir, we access the resources that were concessional, sir, within these circumstances, because we didn't set out, sir, to necessarily increase the borrowings from the IMF or the World Bank or the IDB or any such thing, sir. The circumstances required that the international community, having recognized that Barbados had already started to implement some reforms already, had confidence in Barbados to be able to make those resources almost immediately available to Barbados because of the work that we had started, sir. And without that hard graft, sir, within the first 18, 19, 20 months, sir, those resources would not have been made available as quickly as they would have been. Yes, the debt trajectory went up on two fronts, because you had to access extra cash because your revenue had fallen by 600 million, sir. So how do you make up 600 million, sir, if you don't get resources from somebody else to lend you, to tide you over, as we would say, sir, till you start to find your feet again? That is what the international community, sir, did for Barbados. Now, yes, we have to repay the money, so there's no doubt about that. But what we have been arguing, sir, and I can say without, I can say with absolute certainty, in every forum that I have attended, in every forum that the Prime Minister has attended, sir, and our colleagues, we have been, and we started to see some progress already, because colleagues will be aware of the launch of the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which Barbados, sir, through our Prime Minister, put on the table when we first came to office in 2018, and it has now come to fruition to respond to the same climate issues that I spoke about earlier, as our ability to finance our way through. So we see that there's been some progress on that. But during COVID, sir, we have been saying both to the IMF and the international community, sir, that the debt that was incurred specifically because of COVID, sir, specifically because of COVID, that we need to get that debt a different workout, repayment term, sir, over a longer period, such that it does not create, sir, any issues for not just Barbados, but all countries globally, because at the end of the day, sir, these are debts that we incurred not because, sir, the government was whatless and we didn't know what we were doing, sir. It was a genuine external shock that required us to take extraordinary decisions in a short space of time in order to help safeguard, sir, the stability of this country. And, sir, I am proud that we have been able to do that and do that successfully. Having said that, sir, we will continue to make the point to the IMF and all of the multilateral agencies that the COVID debt, sir, must be worked out over a longer period of time. So yes, we signed the agreements as they were then, but I am absolutely confident, given the progress that we have seen, sir, that we are going to come to a solution on this very quickly, because as we all know, sir, because we're in that neck of the woods, sir, where things happen and outside is already quite stormy at the moment, we're always vulnerable, sir, always vulnerable. And in case that even though outside may be sunny some days, sir, there's always a storm brewing somewhere. And in the last 4 years, sir, I've seen storms daily brewing, that when you wake up in the morning, sir, you don't know what's going to happen till you put on your head. But the point is, Barbados have weathered all of those storms, sir. And we will continue, sir, to provide the type of leadership that I believe, sir, this country demands of us, because it is absolutely critical, sir, absolutely critical, that the way that we use debt must always, sir, to be to the interests of Barbadians, but equally, sir, to the development trajectory of this country. And therefore, it is absolutely, absolutely critical, sir, that the policies that you're spending the resources on will have long-term positive impact with respect to the country, but certainly, sir, with respect to the lives of ordinary people. Now, the debt conversion, sir, in the context here with respect to the substance of this bill, is really, sir, to allow for us to be able to enter into a counter guarantee agreement with any specific entity, sir. But I'll just, just to tease a little bit, sir, as you know, we have been seeking, since we completed the debt restructuring, sir, to be able to facilitate what is referred to as a debt for nature swap. The traditional approach, sir, did not work because our debt, and not just the debt, but the confidence, sir, the confidence that the market had with respect to our performance was such that our debt continues, sir, to trade at par. Meaning, sir, because normally, sir, when a country restructures its debt, for every $100, sir, that one might invest, sir, typically, usually on average, the price of that debt reduces down to 60 cents, maybe 70 cents, depending on how bad things are, how people see. Because people will sell off the debt, sir, in order to get back the money as quickly as possible. But that was not the case with Barbados, sir, because we undertook some very serious reforms initially. The market was sufficiently confident in our ability to repay, and we simply, sir, did not see that immediate sell-off of the debt because of the confidence that, or the perceived confidence that the market had, certainly with respect to Barbados at that time. And so therefore, we have had to do some innovative thinking, and at the appropriate time, sir, we will come to the Parliament and go into absolute details with respect to it. But suffice it to say, sir, we have reached a stage now, sir, with our partners that we believe we have reached an approach that will allow us to be able to execute that debt for nature swap, which effectively, sir, as it says here at clause 4 in the bill, that for the purpose of this act, the government may, in such manner, on such terms, and subject to such conditions as may be agreed with anybody, enter into a counter guarantee agreement in respect of debt to be issued by the government, the proceeds of which will be used for debt conversion transactions to support environmental, economic, and social development in Barbados. And the second clause, sir, the amount of any debt in respect of which the government enters into the counter guarantee agreement shall be and is hereby appropriated for the purposes specified in the counter guarantee agreement. And the reality is, sir, that we continue to innovate, not just with respect to the cost of the debt that we acquire, but to try to make sure, sir, that that in so servicing that debt and people having confidence within your ability to be able to finance our way through this, growth is going to be very, very critical, sir, with respect to being able to see our way through. And therefore, it is absolutely important that every Barbadian, sir, recognizes that we simply cannot get through what we are getting through with respect to moving out from this stage unless we're able to grow the economy in order to respond to the debt issues that face us. And so, sir, this bill before the chamber allows the government to execute a series of transactions that would allow us to be able to divert existing debt service into other areas of social, economic, or environmental development. As I said earlier, sir, there will be a substantive debate on the full details of all of this at the appropriate time. But suffice it to say, sir, this bill before the chamber is important for helping the government to better manage, again, the resources that we already are making available to servicing our debt, but equally, sir, with respect to improving the lives of ordinary Barbadians. And so, sir, with those very few words, I beg to move, sir, that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Member Samika South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief, but I do think that this is an important piece of legislation, not simply in terms of what it allows the government of Barbados to be able to do with respect to being able to have a sovereign counter guarantee in its arsenal as one of the instruments that we're able to enter into with multilateral agencies such as the Inter-American Development Bank. This bill becomes necessary because the current legislation governing our operations with institutions like the IDB, specifically the IDB Act, does not make provision for the kind of relationship and the kind of instrument, the kind of guarantee that can enhance the creditworthiness or the confidence of a particular operation, such as the one described by the member who led this bill. And so this becomes necessary to enable the government of Barbados to do what it needs to do, and in that regard, I support the bill. But I do want to give brief reflection in line, Mr. Speaker, with some of the observations and the reflections already made by the member for Christchurch East Central, who finds himself having to make these kinds of appeals and explanations through you to the people of Barbados, but not just to the public, but importantly to some of our colleagues who would seek to hold forth on some of these issues for their own leverage or gain, and therefore would seek to obscure what is the plain truth of the financial situation or the economic position of Barbados. And I would dare say that the member finds himself, the government finds itself in that position of constantly having to explain, constantly having to repeat some of these principles for one simple fact in our history, in our very recent history, and that is the fact that we are still suffering from the ignominy, the unwelcome distinction of having had a finance minister whose performance and whose record of economic management can in no wise be celebrated, who led an economic response to the 2008 financial crisis, sir, that saw him repeatedly and publicly throwing up his hands in despair, who saw him publicly declaring, well, this is the worst crisis that the world has ever faced and could possibly face. I beg of thee, what would you have me do? That was the refrain of the former Minister of Finance. That is the reason that we find ourselves in this position. That is the reason that the member for Christchurch East Central will constantly, and successive governments, I dare say, will constantly have to remind Barbadians that they can trust the economic decision-making of the government that they chose. We are suffering that track record, regrettably. Except, sir, it was not the worst economic and human development crisis that the world could possibly face. And having the benefit of reflection might make one say that this that we are now experiencing is perhaps the worst economic and human development and climate and debt and financial crisis that we could possibly face. And accept, sir, that unlike what that minister at the time suggested, it was possible to face down and to fix the country's ballooning debt crisis, because we did. And we demonstrated that it could be done. But we continue to suffer the international public shame and disgrace, and we have it on our track record, regrettably, even though the world is beginning to forget because of the actions of this administration. But we, are having to have these conversations because of the trust that was lost during that period. And in many ways, we have a responsibility to keep talking and keep explaining because the government is the government. And we have to make up, regrettably, for the fact that we did have a finance minister whose answer to a $17 billion debt problem was a $70 million debt reprofiling plan. Imagine you have a debt of $17.6 billion, and the best that the then minister could think up was to reprofile the debt to the tune of $70 million. That was the grand plan. That was as far, sir, as he could rise to the occasion. Now, I do not say these things to shame a man for having failed to rise to the occasion. I have not had much experience with that affliction. But even had I, it would not be in my nature to point out such deficiencies for the primary purpose of shaming a person. That's not who I am, sir. And I do not say these things to dwell in the past. I do not say these things to dwell in the past. I am sensitive and convinced of the truth that the government is the government. You are elected to serve, you are elected to lead, and that is why I never want to hear from these front benches, like we heard from the last finance minister, what would you have me do? I am saying it to my colleagues in arms. I never want to hear that kind of approach because the government is the government. I never want to hear explanations and excuses about finance payments not being made on time because the government is the government. I never want to hear observations about what might be deficiencies in the human capacity of project teams in a ministry. And I'm warning us, but in all seriousness, not to start, because before I had the singular distinction of being asked by the people of St. Michael South Central to sit in this honorable place, that was an annoyance as a citizen of this country that I had of the last administration. And I'm saying it, all cards on the table. A government must never throw up its hands and not have a plan. If you are coming to this place to make observations about what is wrong in the government, who are you telling? Who are you telling? But I do say these things, sir, to make the point that that period where the then finance minister and the then government could not find a plan beyond a $70 million debt reprofiling, that was not rock bottom for the global and economic system. This arguably is a far more complete crisis. But you know, sir, when you cried wolf at that time, to make up for the fact that you were the one eating the livestock, that you were the one feasting on the self-declared fatted calf, when you cried wolf to cover up for that fact, when the wolf really comes and a new farmer calls it, then the inhabitants of the village have less trust for the word of the farmer. And regrettably, that's what we're living in. We have, and I say we because we are the leadership of this country, to be able to plug in and do the work to be able to explain things to people of this country. But even in the face of the real wolf, sir, this government has not said, what would you have me do? In the face of the real wolf, this government has developed new financial instruments, such as this one, to be able to return the volley time and time again. And this is not the only weapon in our arsenal. We were able to introduce natural disaster clauses so that in the event of a disaster, we have 2 years moratorium and we don't have to repay. We were able to, on the basis of those natural disaster clauses, convince the Inter-American Development Bank to develop something called the principal payment option that mirrors the natural disaster clauses in their own debt. We were able, as the former speaker said, to establish a resilience and sustainability trust. But I want to go a little bit further if this chamber will indulge me, and I will try to go quickly because I know that we have some weather on the horizon. I want to make reference, sir, to the fact that in 2018, the debt service in this country was 68%. 68 cents out of every dollar went to pay down the debt. In January of this year, the debt service was 30%. 30 cents out of every dollar went to pay down the debt. What does that mean? It means that in 2018, when we came to service as a government, all the room that we had was 32% to spend, 32 cents out of every dollar to spend on education, on health, on roads, on all these things. After the debt restructuring, after we did the work that we needed to do, that number increased to 70 cents out of every dollar. It makes a difference. And that's the difference. But I want to be able to go further. And I have to, and sir, if you will please indulge me, to mention two names of the young men, one younger than the other, who pulled some of this data for us. Dr. Kevin Greenidge and Justin Carter, together at the Central Bank, who did very important work to be able to help us do two things. To be able to look at what was the loss in GDP to several countries as a result of COVID, and then to look at what they borrowed in response to that loss in GDP. And I can make the document available to members. I will have to ask one of my colleagues on the front bench if they're so inclined to move or to ask that it be made a document of this House once and for all, because I believe it is important information. And I will go very quickly. In advanced economies, such as Canada.
Remember, if you're reading from it, you don't have to ask someone from the front bench to so do. If you are endeavoring to quote from it, then it ought to be your responsibility as you want to read from it to lay it before this honorable chamber.
I thank you for the guidance, sir, and I will so do. In advanced economies, I begin with Canada, that saw a contraction in their economy of 5.4%. Between 2019 and 2020, that's the reference period, borrowed 31% of GDP. For reference, I will tell you that the increase in debt in Barbados between 2019 and 2020 was 22%. That was the increase in debt that we saw as a result of COVID. 22%, 22% of GDP. And again, as the member before me said, taking account of the fact that the GDP contracted and it was smaller, Canada shrunk 5.4% and borrowed 31%. Barbados shrunk 17.6% and borrowed 22%. France shrunk 8.2% and borrowed 15%. Italy shrunk half of Barbados, 8.9%, and borrowed 21%. Shrank half as much as Barbados and borrowed the same amount in advanced economies. So not in small island states, so not in emerging economies, so not in vulnerable countries. And I could go on and on. The comparison is here. And I encourage members and others to understand, on the basis of this document, on the basis of this analysis, that you cannot expect to go through the perfect storm of economic and human development crisis. Because this is not the housing crisis of 2007, 2008 that the former finance minister sat down and ate up his fine clothes about and didn't know what to do. This is a thorough and complete meltdown in global economic system that continues today, that worsens today. Sir, in a couple of weeks, I will have the distinction of sitting on a panel with colleagues who are governors of central banks and chief economists of institutions, as I know I am, to sit down and try and figure out what do we do about global inflation, to sit down and try and figure out what do we do about the impact that the war that Russia started in Ukraine is going to have on famine and drought and existential issues globally. These are the conversations the world is having, and the former finance minister could not figure out how to find his way out of a contraction caused by a crisis in the housing market in 2007, 2008, all up in 2017, can't figure it out. And we want to know why it is that Barbados had to borrow. And I want to further say that all of this conjecture, oh, is the IMF now a development finance institution? Is it that we are saying that we are partnering with the IMF to be able to access funding? Yes. For those who are being quoted in the newspapers who cannot hear me, I will repeat myself. Yes. Why is that even a question? We need to move away from these fanciful matters that are going to give us a headline and get to the meat of the matter, which is not the fact that we've been able to secure the country at the macro level. The macro level is when you build a hospital. You build the building is finished, you plastered, it is going to stand up. That's the work that the economic team has done. That's the beginning. That's the framework. As the Honourable Prime Minister likes to say, that's the backdrop. You now have to go check room by room in those hospital rooms and in those hospital beds, in those households and in those companies, in those small businesses to make sure that those patients are alive and well and thriving and can be discharged. That's the next step that we need to talk about. So I made an attempt in here today, sir, to draw some parallels with the reasons for the borrowing, but also to make the point that the gross debt as a percentage of GDP, the highest level it reached post-COVID in Barbados, is already on its way back down, and according to the advice that I received, it's poised to be at around 127% debt to GDP by the end of May, which is around the number it was after the restructuring was finished. Back on the downward trajectory. So I don't want us to get caught up with wringing our arms about the levels of debt. Because we had to borrow, we were able to borrow to do the work, and the debt numbers are on their way back down. But I want to make a very quick point about the reason for debt. And it is a simple one. Public Finance 101 tells us that you do not take from your piggy bank. You do not take from the consolidated fund. You don't take from the money that you raise on a day-to-day basis to pay for day-to-day things. You don't take that money and pay for long-term investments. You do not go and pick up all the money, sir, all the money that you have on a credit union to go and make some kind of big investment in a car or in a house. You go to the bank. Some of the wealthiest people, some of the most liquid people in the world will still approach the bank for a mortgage to pay for a home. You don't take your liquidity, and use it to finance long-term projects. You use financing for that purpose. The healthiest of economies use financing for road infrastructure, use financing for housing infrastructure. Because then you have a return of that investment over time that matches the maturity of the loan that you have taken. And that is the way economies operate. That is why Canada contracted 5.4% and borrowed 31%. But I also want to say further that we have something else that is different from when the last government was borrowing, which is that we finally have a foreign reserve position. Just over $3 billion, the level of foreign reserves, and I don't call these numbers to show off, but why does it matter? The purpose of foreign reserves is to back your liabilities. Put in other terms, you can have and maintain a certain level of debt if you got reserves. When the last finance minister had $18 billion in debt and 4.5 weeks of reserves, well, that was why the country was in the problem it was in. When Barbados now has 135% debt to GDP and $3 billion in reserves, that is a much better place to be. Global finance institutions look at something called debt-based measures of reserve adequacy. All that is a fancy way of saying that if you got a certain level of debt, you have to have a certain level of reserves. And these are the kinds of things that matter for your level of debt. But I have to say, finally, something that moves us from the macro. That we built, and perhaps the new hospital is not the analogy I should use, but let's go with it. We built the new hospital. We have patients in beds, we have patients in rooms, we have different levels of illness. We are going to need the growth to see the real recovery of those households that are those patients in the rooms and of those businesses. And the conversation now has to move from the macro to the micro. The Minister of Finance, the Honourable Prime Minister, was kind enough to share with us, and I say with me, because as a member of this parliamentary party, a list of projects that the government is looking to execute. The proof is in the pudding, and that is a simple matter. The question of whether we can grow enough to outstrip the interest rates that we have is in the pudding, is in the execution. And it means that there's some entrenched approaches to governance that have to be imploded. I use the word imploded on purpose. Because we cannot have the mandate that we have given to us by the people of Barbados who are the patients in the rooms who are looking to get discharged, and not understand that it cannot be business as usual. Even saying it cannot be business as usual is business as usual. And so the things that bedevil that execution, the reasons that we cannot get things going, I want to see more than a list of projects, I gotta tell you. I want us to be able to understand that we're only gonna start to see the growth rate outstrip the average interest rate of the portfolio of the new borrowing since 2018 was below 2%. So those who, and we are all colleagues with our friends at the university, but let us not demonstrate a propensity to be willfully obtuse. To ask, well, what is the interest rate that you're getting at the IMF that makes it worth it? Well, anybody can tell you that. The member for Christ Church Essential can tell you that the IMF money is the cheapest money in town. And to the extent that we have a financing gap, that the government has a financing gap, I need to learn to stop saying we. To the extent that the government has a financing gap, that is one of the better options available. Now, the growth that this government has promised us is going to get us beyond that point. But let us not pretend that we don't understand why we are developing a new relationship with the International Monetary Fund. We understand why. Because interest rates are on the way back up globally. Let us lock it in while we can and do the business of the people of Barbados, but let us stop quibbling over this notion of debt, and let us start monitoring the real indicators of people's well-being and development. How many people are working? How many people are eating nutritious food? Enough of it. These are the kinds of things. How many people are able to start small businesses that survive a 3-year period and then a 5-year period? So I hope that with the intervention of the member who led the bill, and I hope that with my own intervention, I have been able to give a little bit of my own understanding of what these questions of debt mean, because I beg of us, let us get beyond the armchair navel gazing and do the work of the people of this country. Because this is time-sensitive business. There is a time period. There is a period. My English teacher would not wrap me on knuckles for saying time period. But there is a period beyond which people can no longer survive. And that's why we cannot be in the business of kicking the can down the road. What do we need to do to get the projects delivered? If it is the Commitment for Results program that is going to hold officers and all of us accountable for delivery, let us get it moving. If it is a new approach to understanding performance, let us get it done. There's more that can be said, but I am conscious that we have to get on, not just with making sure that we are secure from the weather, but we also have to get on with the business of making sure that all Barbadians are economically secure. The notion of poverty being a line is a fallacy, because I can be not poor today and I can be poor tomorrow because I have a family member whose surgery I had to pay for, or somebody whose university I had to pay for, or whose school I had to pay for. Let us understand that we are here to guarantee economic security for the people who elected us to serve, and let us get on with the business of doing just that. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Christchurch Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the honourable member for a very spirited intervention. I believe, sir, that as we conclude this debate, certainly in the midst of the storm, and I'm always reminded, sir, that as a small country, sir, the sea is always rough. The international environment is always rough, sir. But the honourable member for St. Michael South Central reminded us that this government, certainly faced with whatever challenges certainly have come our way to date, we have put our heads together, sir, to respond to what we've been confronted with. Very clear and very conscious of our capacity and our limitations with respect to financing specifically, because it is important that we realize that as we emerge from this pandemic, sir, and we see the growth, the reopening of the economy, day after day, week after week, sir, we are seeing the recovery back almost to 2019 levels. But what is important now, sir, is to make sure then that all our citizens realize that each of us, we will have to do what we have to do in our respective spaces, sir, to be able to do that which we can do today, and don't leave it until tomorrow. And therefore, when the honourable member spoke about it not being business as usual, that is literally, sir, what it means, because unless you're able to conclude and execute and move quickly, the length of time that it takes, there's an opportunity cost, sir, there, time loss, people working, incomes being earned, sir, investment being delayed, and therefore wherever we are, whether in the public sector or the private sector, sir, our ability to be able to continue a very strong development trajectory, sir, really lies with how quickly, sir, we all can work to ensure that we can execute such that whether it's reforms or whatever is happening within the innovation in the private sector, reform in the public sector, innovation in the private sector, sir, that both are matched and aligned to be able to see that Barbados can attain not just the sustainable development goals, but that the recovery that we engineered, sir, in 2018, that recovery is inclusive, that Barbadians can see and feel the benefits, sir, of said recovery, being able to mobilize all of our investment opportunities domestically, regionally, and internationally, sir, in order to help us to get through this very critical period. Because whatever the numbers are, with each day we add more and more GDP, sir, the debt trajectory comes down because the denominator, sir, once the denominator gets larger, it means that your ability, sir, to service that debt is made much easier as a country. There's greater confidence, and with greater confidence, sir, both at the consumer, business, and investor level, then you are in a position to be able to do well by your citizens. So, sir, let me thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I will conclude this debate by indicating to the country, sir, that we will continue to focus on improving the delivery of public services. We have to continue to make sure that in order not to be stalled, that we don't make bad decisions out of a permanent decision out of a temporary situation, and therefore the extent to which the government of Barbados will continue to advocate for the policy space and the changes that are required to help small and developing states and to avoid contagion as it relates to debt, that we will continue to push these matters, but the reforms that we have to continue at home, the innovation that needs to be done in the private sector, that we must do these things, do them quickly, and get on, sir, with respect to being able to improve the lives of our citizens. And so with those very few words, sir, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Question is that this bill be read here a second time. All of our members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 1 to 4 stand part.
The question is that clauses 1 to 4 stand part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clauses 5 to 7.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clauses 5 to 7 stand part.
The question is that clauses 5 to 7 stand part. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Thinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees is reporting the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable Member Christchurch East Central.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against it, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this act be now passed.
This bill.
This bill be now passed and cited as a Debt Conversion Counter Guarantee Act 2022.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against it, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, with that, we've come to the end of our business for today. I think members will recognize immediately, speaking on the adjournment, of course, that we've somewhat truncated our sitting. This is because of the weather. We are already, I think, experiencing a few power outages. We're expecting high gusts and some rain and so on during the course of the evening. As a result of that, we've taken the decision to close the public service at 3:30 today, and I'm informed that buses will start running at 6:30. We urge Barbadians to make their way home safely, and of course we want to ensure that our hatches are battened down and that we treat this as preparation for hurricane season, predictions of which do suggest will be fairly active. I beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that we adjourn until Tuesday, 5th of July at 10 in the morning.
The question is that this honorable chamber be adjourned until the 5th day of July at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 5th day of July at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.